German Shepherd Mom freezes with 2 puppies, the rescue that will melt your heart. The blizzard howled outside, its icy claws tearing at the weathered walls of Owen Marwood's cabin, nestled deep in the Whispering Pines hollow. Inside, the retired firefighter sat in his worn armchair, the fireplace casting a tender golden glow across the room, painting flickering shadows that danced like memories on the log walls. Snow had trapped him for days, the world beyond his windows a swirling white void, and the silence was a heavy companion, broken only by the soft crackle of burning logs. Owen, a man whose hands had once pulled lives from flames, now savoured the quiet of his solitude, until a sound pierced the stillness, faint but desperate, like a heartbeat struggling to be heard. It was a scratching, fragile yet insistent, followed by a muffled whimper that tugged at Owen's soul. He set his steaming mug of tea on the table, his silver-flecked beard catching the firelight as he tilted his head, listening. There it was again, a plea woven into the wind's wail. His heart thudded, a familiar rush from years of answering calls in the dark, and he rose, his boots scuffing the floor as he moved toward the front door. Through the frosted glass, a silhouette emerged against the storm's fury, a German shepherd, her trembling form pressed against the pane, her breath fogging the cold surface in fleeting clouds. Beside her, almost lost in the snow's embrace, were 2 tiny pups, their frail bodies huddled beneath her protective stance. Owen's breath caught, his hand hovering over the doorknob as the wind roared a warning. Her fur was crusted with frost, her ribs stark against her matted coat, and her amber eyes, glistening with a mix of fear and fragile hope, locked onto his. "Who are you, brave one?" he whispered, his voice a tender murmur lost in the cabin's warmth. She didn't move, her paws rooted in the snow, a mother's courage holding her steady despite the storm's relentless bite. Owen's chest ached with a pang he hadn't felt in years, not since he'd hung up his gear, trading chaos for calm. Opening the door meant inviting the unknown into his sanctuary, but those eyes, pleading and pure, stirred a spark within him he couldn't ignore. "Come on, sweet girl," he coaxed, his voice trembling with a softness he'd barely recognized. He crouched low, his broad frame shrinking to meet her gaze, his grey eyes warm with invitation. "You'll freeze out there, you and those little ones." The wind surged as he cracked the door, its icy breath rushing in, but she hesitated, her body quivering as she glanced at her pups. One, smaller than the other, stumbled in the snow, its tiny legs buckling under the cold's weight. With a gentle nudge of her nose, she urged them forward, then with a mother's fierce love, scooped the weaker pup by the scruff and stepped inside, the second trailing behind on wobbly paws. Owen shut the door swiftly, sealing out the storm's roar, and the cabin's warmth enveloped them like a hug. The German shepherd shivered harder, her body adjusting to the sudden shift, and Owen's heart clenched as he grabbed a quilt from the couch, its faded patches a map of his quiet years. He draped it over her and the pups, his hands hovering as she flinched, then softened, her amber eyes meeting his with a flicker of trust. She sank to the floor by the fire, curling around her babies, a long, shaky sigh escaping her as if she'd carried the weight of the world to this moment. The pups, their eyes barely open, pressed closer, their frail chests rising with laboured breaths, and Owen knelt nearby, his rough hands itching to help, but stilled by her watchful gaze. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice thick with awe. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" She didn't growl, didn't pull away, just watched him with a wariness that spoke of battles he couldn't yet fathom. Owen rose, fetching a bowl of warm water from the kitchen, setting it near her, with a gentle nod. "Take your time, Mamma." She eyed him, then leaned forward, lapping at the water with a thirst that broke his heart, her pups nuzzling tighter against her side. He stepped back, settling into his chair, the fire's glow illuminating the trio as his mind spun with questions. Where had she come from? How had she braved a blizzard with 2 newborns clinging to her? The mother's frame was thin, her coat a tangle of ice and neglect, yet her spirit burned bright, a miracle of resilience that humbled him. The pups, so small they fit in the palm of his hand, whimpered softly, their tiny tails twitching as they sought her warmth. Owen's gaze softened, a smile tugging at his lips despite the ache in his chest. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he said, his voice a whisper of reverence. He'd always loved dogs. His old partner, Blaze, had been his shadow through the firehouse years, but retirement had dulled that part of him, leaving him content with the stillness. Now this trio had crashed into his life, fragile yet fierce, and he couldn't turn away. As the night deepened, Owen worked quietly to ease their burden. He laid out towels for the pups, their damp fur soaking the fabric, and set a bowl of leftover stew near the mother, stepping back to give her space. She sniffed it cautiously, then ate, her eyes darting to him between bites, a guarded trust blooming in the firelight. He stoked the flames higher, the room growing cozy as the storm raged on outside, and watched as her posture softened, her head resting on the quilt for the first time. The pups nestled closer, their whimpers fading into contented sighs, and Owen felt a warmth spread through him, a purpose he hadn't known he'd lost. "You've got a home here tonight," he said, his voice a vow as he settled back into his chair, "no matter what tomorrow brings." The German shepherd's eyes fluttered shut, her breathing steadying, and Owen's heart swelled with a quiet joy. He didn't know their story, didn't know what had driven her to his doorstep, but he knew one thing. She'd chosen him, and he'd chosen her back. As the fire crackled and the wind howled, he made a silent promise to this brave mother and her fragile pups. They were his now, and he'd protect them with all he had, a bond born in the blizzard's embrace that would light his world anew. The storm's fury had faded by morning, leaving Whispering Pines Hollow draped in a glistening quilt of snow, the silence outside Owen Marwood's cabin as profound as a held breath. Inside, the fire had burned low, its embers casting a soft, amber glow across the room where the German shepherd lay curled around her pups. Owen stirred in his armchair, his neck stiff from a night spent watching over his unexpected guests, the faint sound of their whimpers tugging him from a restless doze. He rubbed his eyes, the scent of wood smoke lingering in the air, and turned to see the trio still nestled by the hearth, a fragile family bound by love and survival. The mother's amber eyes flicked open as Owen shifted, her ears twitching at the creak of the floorboards. She didn't rise, but her gaze locked onto his, wary yet softer than the night before, as if the warmth of the cabin had begun to thaw the ice around her heart. "Good morning, brave girl," Owen said, his voice a gentle murmur, warm with a tenderness he hadn't felt in years. The pups stirred beneath her, their tiny bodies wriggling against her side, their soft cries piercing the stillness. Owen's chest tightened, a pang of awe and worry mingling as he watched them. 2 little souls, so frail yet clinging to life with a fierceness that mirrored their mother's. He stretched, his joints protesting the night's vigil, and shuffled to the kitchen, the cold floor biting at his sock. "Let's get you something proper," he said over his shoulder, rummaging through his sparse pantry. A can of beef broth caught his eye. Not ideal, but better than nothing for a starving mother and her babies. He warmed it on the stove, the savoury scent filling the cabin, and poured it into a shallow bowl, setting it near her with a careful nod. "Take your time, Mamma." She lifted her head, sniffing the air, her ribs stark against her matted fur as she shifted. After a long, cautious pause, she lapped at the broth, her pups nuzzling closer, their tiny tails twitching as they sensed her calm. Owen knelt a few feet away, his grey eyes tracing her every move. "You're a marvel," he whispered, his voice thick with admiration. "Carrying these little ones through that storm, you're stronger than I ever was." Her coat was a patchwork of ice and neglect, her frame so thin he could count her bones, yet her spirit burned bright, a flame that had guided her to his door. The pups, barely bigger than his hand, whimpered as they tried to nurse, their efforts feeble but determined. Owen's heart ached at the sight. Years of pulling people from danger had hardened him, but this quiet struggle, this mother's love, cracked something open inside him he'd thought long buried. He couldn't just watch. Rising, he grabbed his phone from the counter, its screen glowing in the dim light, as he dialed the only vet he trusted, Dr. Lila Hensley, a kind soul who'd patched up strays and farm dogs alike in the nearby town of Ember. "Lila, it's Owen Marwood," he said when she answered, his voice rough with urgency. "I've got a German shepherd and 2 pups here, showed up in the blizzard last night. They're in rough shape. Can you see them today?" Lila's tone was warm, steady. "Bring them in this afternoon, Owen. We'll make room. Sounds like they're lucky to have you." He hung up, relief washing over him, and glanced at the trio. "You hear that, girl? Help's coming." Getting them to the truck was a dance of trust. Owen fetched an old plaid blanket from the closet, its edges frayed from years of use, and approached slowly, his boots soft on the floor. "Easy now," he murmured, crouching as he spread it out. She tensed, her body coiling protectively around her pups, a low rumble in her throat. Not aggressive, just a mother's warning. "I'm not taking them from you," he promised, his hands raised in surrender. "We're just going for a ride, get you fixed up." Her eyes searched his, amber pools of doubt and hope, and after a heartbeat, she relaxed, letting him slide the blanket beneath her. With a gentleness honed from years of care, he lifted her and the pups together, their weight light but precious in his arms. The drive to Emberfield was slow, the road still slick with ice, the world outside a shimmering sea of white. Owen kept the heater low, mindful of their fragile state, and glanced at them in the rearview mirror. The mother lay still, her head resting on the blanket, pups nestled against her belly, their tiny breaths fogging the air. "You're tougher than me, you know that?" he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'd have given up out there." Her ears flicked, as if she understood, and Owen felt a warmth bloom in his chest, a connection he hadn't sought, but couldn't deny. At the clinic, Dr. Lila met them at the door, her greying hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with compassion. "Let's see these brave ones," she said, her voice a soothing balm as she led them inside. Owen carried the blanket in, setting it gently on the exam table, and stepped back as Lila's hands moved with practiced grace. "She's malnourished, severely," Lila said, her fingers tracing the mother's bony frame. "But she's a survivor. These pups, they're lucky she held on this long." Owen swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the trio. "She showed up at my door like she knew I'd help. I couldn't leave her out there." Lila smiled, a knowing glint in her eye. "She chose well, Owen. She'll need time, food, rest, but she'll pull through, the pups too, with care." She fed them a special formula, the tiny ones latching on with hungry squeaks, and gave the mother a nutrient-rich meal, her amber eyes softening as she ate. Owen watched, his heart swelling with a quiet joy. He'd given them a chance, and they'd taken it with a trust that humbled him. "Any idea where she came from?" he asked, his voice low. Lila shook her head. "No collar, no chip. Could be a stray or someone's loss. She's been on her own a while, though." Back at the cabin, the mother seemed calmer, her pups full and wriggling happily as she curled around them by the fire. Owen sat closer this time, his hand hovering before resting lightly on her head. She didn't flinch, didn't growl, just leaned into his touch, a faint sigh escaping her as if she'd finally found peace. "You're home now," he murmured, tears pricking his eyes. "I don't know what you've seen, but you're safe with me." Her eyes met his, a flicker of gratitude shimmering within, and Owen felt a lump rise in his throat. Retirement had dulled his days, but this trio, this brave mother and her fragile pups, had rekindled a fire in his soul. As night fell, the cabin glowed with a warmth deeper than the hearth's flames. Owen stoked the fire, the crackle a lullaby for the sleeping pups, and settled into his chair, watching the German shepherd rest. She'd chosen his doorstep in the storm's darkest hour, and he'd opened his heart without a second thought. Now, as her breathing steadied and her pups nestled close, Owen knew they'd saved each other, a bond forged in the blizzard's embrace, a second chance neither had expected, but both desperately needed. The morning sun crept through the cabin's windows, its golden rays spilling across the wooden floor of Whispering Pines Hollow, painting the world in a tender light after the storm's wrath. Owen Marwood woke to the soft rustle of movement, his eyes blinking open to find the German shepherd stirring by the fireplace, her amber gaze already fixed on him. The pups, two tiny bundles of life, wriggled against her side, their whimpers a fragile melody that tugged at Owen's heart. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, but the warmth lingered, wrapping the cabin in a cocoon of safety that felt like a gift after the chaos of the blizzard. "Morning, sweet girl," Owen said, his voice a husky whisper as he eased out of his armchair, his bones creaking from a night spent half awake. She didn't flinch this time, her ears twitching as she watched him rise, a quiet trust shimmering in her eyes where desperation had once reigned. The pups, their fur still damp from the storm's chill, nuzzled closer to her, their tiny tails twitching with the first sparks of life. Owen's chest swelled with a warmth he couldn't name. A retired firefighter who'd faced flames and ruin, now undone by the sight of this brave mother and her fragile babies finding solace in his home. He shuffled to the kitchen, the scent of yesterday's broth lingering as he rummaged for something more substantial. A tin of tuna sat on the shelf, its promise of protein a small offering for a mother who'd carried her pups through hell. He warmed it gently, mixing it with water to soften it, and set the bowl near her with a nod. "You deserve this," he murmured, stepping back to give her space. She lifted her head, sniffing the air, her ribs stark against her thin frame as she shifted. After a heartbeat, she leaned forward, lapping at the meal with a hunger that broke Owen's heart, her pups squeaking as they pressed against her warmth. Owen settled on the floor nearby, his grey eyes tracing her every move. "You're a wonder," he said softly, his voice thick with reverence. "Bringing these little ones here. Through that storm, you're a hero in my book." Her coat was matted, her body worn, but her spirit shone like the embers in the hearth, a fierce love that had defied the cold. The pups, their eyes still sealed shut, nudged her belly, their tiny cries softening as they found comfort in her presence. Owen's hands itched to help, to cradle them. but he held back, honouring the mother's watchful gaze. A guardian who'd fought too hard to let her guard down easily. As she ate, Owen's mind wandered, questions swirling like the snow outside. Where had she come from? What had driven her to his doorstep, half frozen and desperate, with 2 newborns clinging to her? Her condition spoke of days, maybe weeks alone, her strength stretched thin but unbroken. "You're a mystery, aren't you?" he whispered, a smile tugging at his lips. He'd always had a soft spot for dogs. Blaze, his old firehouse companion, had been his shadow through the darkest calls. But this was different. This wasn't just a pet, this was a soul who'd chosen him, a bond born in the storm's embrace that felt like fate. The morning unfolded in quiet moments of care. Owen fetched a fresh towel, laying it beneath the pups to soak up the dampness, their tiny bodies trembling less as the cabin's warmth seeped into them. He stoked the fire, the crackle a lullaby that seemed to ease the mother's tension, her posture softening as she licked her pups clean with a gentleness that melted him. "You're doing good, Mama," he said, his voice a soothing hum. "They're fighters, just like you." She glanced at him, her amber eyes flickering with something new, a spark of trust, fragile but growing, that made Owen's breath catch. By midday the pups grew restless, their squeaks turning to soft yips as they squirmed against her. Owen watched, captivated, as she nudged them with her nose, guiding them closer, her love a shield against the world. "You've got your hands full," he chuckled, and to his surprise, her tail gave a faint wag, a whisper of joy that lit up the room. He reached out, slow and steady, his hand hovering over her head. She tensed, but didn't pull away, and when his fingers brushed her fur, she leaned into the touch, a shaky sigh escaping her. "There you go," Owen murmured, tears pricking his eyes. "You're safe here, I promise." That trust, so hard won, stirred something deep in Owen, a purpose he'd thought lost when he'd left the firehouse behind. Retirement had been a quiet surrender, his days blending into the solitude of whispering pines. But now, with this trio, his cabin felt alive again. He spent the afternoon tending to them, fetching water, warming broth, sitting close enough to feel their presence, but far enough to honour her space. The pups' cries grew stronger, their tiny tails wagging as they nursed, and Owen's heart swelled with a quiet pride. He was part of their survival, a lifeline in their fragile beginning. As evening fell, the cabin glowed with the fire's tender light, the world outside hushed under its snowy blanket. Owen sat by the hearth, watching the German shepherd rest, her head finally sinking onto the quilt, her pups nestled tight against her belly. "You've got a spirit I can't fathom," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what brought you here, but I'm glad it was my door." Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his with a softness that felt like a gift, and Owen felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't just shelter, this was home, a sanctuary born from a moment of instinct and grace. But beneath the warmth, a shadow lingered. As night deepened, Owen's thoughts turned to her past. Her scars, faint lines beneath her fur, spoke of hardship, her wariness a shield forged by pain. Had she been abandoned? Lost? The questions gnawed at him, a quiet ache for the story she couldn't tell. He rose, grabbing his phone, and dialed Dr. Lila again. "Hey, it's Owen," he said, his voice low. "She's eating, resting, but I can't stop wondering, at any chance someone's looking for her." Lila's tone was gentle but firm. "I'll check with the shelters around Ember tomorrow. But Owen, she might have been on her own a while. Keep her close. She needs you now." Hanging up, Owen settled back by the fire, his gaze on the trio. The pups slept soundly, their tiny chests rising and falling, while the mother watched him, her eyes a mirror of resilience and trust. "Whoever you were with before," he murmured, "they didn't deserve you. But I'm here now, and I'm not letting go." She let out a soft whine, her head tilting as if she understood, and Owen's heart cracked open. A retired hero finding purpose in a mother's courage, a bond that promised healing for them all. As the fire crackled and the night stretched on, Owen made a silent vow. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, answers, threats, or simply more quiet days. But he'd protect this family with everything he had. The German shepherd and her pups had stumbled into his life, fragile yet fierce, and in their trust he'd found a light he hadn't known he'd lost. Together they'd face whatever came, a second chance glowing in the embers of a new dawn. The days in Whispering Pines. Hollow unfolded with a gentle rhythm, the snow outside Owen Marwood's cabin softening under the timid warmth of a late winter sun. Inside, the fireplace glowed with a steady flame, its light bathing the German shepherd and her pups in a tender embrace that mirrored the care Owen poured into them. He'd named her Ember, a nod to the fire in her spirit that had carried her through the blizzard, and her pups Flicker and Spark, tiny beacons of life that danced in her shadow. Each morning Owen woke to their soft sounds, his heart swelling with a joy he hadn't known he'd been missing. Ember lay by the hearth, her amber eyes tracking Owen as he moved through the cabin, her once tense frame now easing into the quilt he'd given her. Flicker and Spark, their eyes beginning to peek open, wriggled against her side, their yips growing bolder with each passing day. Owen knelt nearby, setting a bowl of warm broth mixed with kibble beside her, his voice a soothing hum. "Here you go, Ember," he said, his grey eyes crinkling with a smile. "You're looking stronger already." She sniffed the meal, her tail giving a faint wag, a whisper of trust that lit up his world, before lapping at it, her pups nuzzling closer, as if cheered by her calm. "You're a marvel, you know that?" Owen murmured, settling on the floor a few feet away. Her coat, once matted with ice, was beginning to shine with hints of health, her ribs less stark as she regained strength. Flicker, the smaller pup, tumbled over Spark in a clumsy bid for attention, his tiny tail wagging like a metronome of hope. Owen chuckled, his chest tightening with a warmth he'd forgotten. Retirement had dulled his days, but Ember and her babies had rekindled a flame in his soul, a purpose born from their quiet courage. The cabin, once a silent refuge, now thrummed with life. Owen spent his hours tending to them, warming milk for the pups, brushing Ember's fur with a gentleness that surprised even him, sitting close as their trust grew. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the windows, Ember let him cradle Flicker for the first time, her eyes watchful but soft as he held the pup's fragile weight. "Look at you, little fighter," he whispered, tears pricking his eyes as Flicker's tiny tongue brushed his finger. Ember's tail wagged, a slow, deliberate sweep, and Owen felt a lump rise in his throat. This was more than shelter, this was family. But beneath the joy, questions lingered, shadows that danced at the edges of Owen's mind. Ember's scars, faint lines beneath her fur, whispered of a past he couldn't grasp, her wariness a shield forged by pain he longed to understand. He'd called Dr. Lila Hensley again, her voice a steady anchor over the line. "No reports of a missing German shepherd," she'd said, her tone thoughtful. "She might have been abandoned, Owen, left to fend for herself. Keep an eye out. Someone could still come looking." The words settled over him like a chill, a quiet fear he pushed aside as he watched Ember lick Spark clean, her love a balm against the unknown. By evening, the cabin glowed with the fire's tender light. The world outside hushed under its snowy blanket. Owen sat by the hearth, a mug of tea in hand, watching Ember rest, her head nestled beside Flicker and Spark as they slept. "You've changed everything," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was done saving lives, but here you are, saving me." Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his with a softness that felt like a promise. And Owen's heart swelled. He'd opened his door to her in a storm, and she'd opened his heart in return. The next morning brought a shift. As Owen chopped wood outside, the crisp air biting at his cheeks, he glanced at the cabin window to see Ember standing there, her nose pressed to the glass, Flicker and Spark tumbling at her feet. He waved, a grin spreading across his face, and to his delight, her tail wagged, a single joyful sweep that made his pulse race. When he stepped back inside, she met him at the door, her nose nudging his hand with a boldness that stole his breath. "Well, hello there," he chuckled, kneeling to scratch behind her ears. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Ember leaned into him, her tail wagging more freely now, and Flicker barked, a tiny, triumphant sound, circling Owen's legs with Spark in tow. The cabin rang with their playful yips, a symphony of life that drowned out the silence Owen had once cherished. "You've got me wrapped around your paw, Ember," he said, his voice trembling with joy. "All three of you." She pressed her head against his knee, a sigh escaping her, and Owen felt tears well up. This brave mother, who'd fought through a blizzard, had chosen him as her safe harbor, and he'd never felt more alive. But that night, as the fire crackled and the pups dozed, a shadow crept into their peace. Owen sat by the window, absently stroking Ember's fur, when her ears shot up, her body tensing beneath his hand. A low growl rumbled from her throat, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. Owen's heart skipped, his firefighter's instincts flaring as he leaned closer, squinting into the night. The moonlight glinted off the snow, casting long shadows across the yard. And there, just at the edge of the trees, a figure stood, cloaked in stillness, watching. "Ember, what is it?" Owen whispered, his voice low as he tightened his grip on her quilt. She rose, her hackles bristling, her growl deepening as she positioned herself between the pups and the window. Owen's stomach churned, a chill racing down his spine. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, a silhouette against the snow's glow. "Stay here," he murmured, grabbing his phone and dialing the Emberfield Sheriff's Office, his voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at him. "This is Owen Marwood. There's someone outside my cabin standing at the tree line. Can you send someone?" The dispatcher promised a deputy within the hour, but time stretched thin as Owen waited, his hand resting on Ember's back, her growls a constant hum of warning. When headlights finally pierced the darkness, relief flooded him. Deputy Clara Voss, a no-nonsense woman with a flashlight as sharp as her gaze, stepped from her cruiser. Owen met her at the door, Ember at his heels, her eyes never leaving the woods. "Saw someone out there?" he said, his voice firm. "They were just watching." Clara nodded, her hand on her holster. "I'll check it out. Stay inside." Owen locked the door behind her, his heart pounding as he watched her beam cut through the trees. Ember paced, her pups whimpering softly, and Owen knelt beside her, his voice a soothing vow. "You're safe, girl. I've got you." When Clara returned, her expression was grim. "No one now, but there are tracks, fresh ones, leading off into the woods. Someone was here, Owen?" His gut twisted, a question burning in his mind. "Anything else?" Clara hesitated. Found an old rope tied to a tree, worn but recent. Could be a camp nearby. The words hung heavy as Clara left, promising extra patrols, and Owen bolted the door, his mind racing. Who was out there? Why were they watching? Ember pressed against his leg, her eyes flickering with a fear he hadn't seen since that first night, and Owen's resolve hardened. "No one's touching you," he whispered, stroking her fur. "You're mine now, yours and these little ones." She let out a shaky whine, her head resting on his knee, and Owen knew this wasn't just a stray's refuge anymore. This was a fight for the family he'd found, a flame rekindled he'd protect at any cost. The night stretched long and restless in Whispering Pines Hollow, the cabin's walls creaking under the weight of an unseen tension that lingered after Deputy Clara's visit. Owen Marwood sat by the window, his rifle propped against the armchair, its cold steel a silent promise as the fire cast flickering shadows across the room. Ember lay at his feet, her amber eyes glinting with a wary light, her body coiled like a spring, despite the warmth enveloping them. Flicker and Spark slept soundly by the hearth, their tiny snores a fragile lullaby, oblivious to the storm brewing in their mother's heart. And in Owen's. He hadn't slept, his mind churning with the image of that figure in the woods, the rope tied to the tree, a chilling clue to a past he couldn't yet grasp. Ember's growl had been more than instinct. It was memory, a shard of fear that pierced the trust they'd built. "Who hurt you, girl?" Owen murmured, his voice a tender thread in the stillness as he reached down to stroke her fur. She leaned into his touch, a shaky sigh escaping her, but her ears stayed pricked, her gaze darting to the window at every rustle of the wind. Owen's chest tightened. This brave mother, who'd carried her pups through a blizzard, was haunted by shadows he'd vowed to banish. Morning broke with a pale, hesitant light, the snow outside glistening like a fragile hope. Owen rose, his joints stiff from the vigil, and poured coffee, its bitter warmth a small comfort, as he watched Ember tend to flicker and spark. The pups were growing, their eyes now fully open, flickers a soft hazel, sparks a bright blue, their clumsy tumbles a spark of joy that softened the night's unease. Ember licked them clean, her gentleness a balm, and when Owen set a bowl of kibble beside her, she wagged her tail, a slow, grateful sweep that made his heart ache with pride. "You're getting stronger," he said, his voice thick. "We're in this together now." But the peace was fleeting. As Owen stepped outside to gather firewood, the crisp air biting at his cheeks, Ember followed, her nose pressed to the porch's edge, sniffing the world beyond with a tension that set his nerves alight. Flicker and Spark yipped from the doorway, their tiny paws testing the threshold, and Owen smiled. Until Ember froze, her hackles rising, her growl low and guttural as she stared toward the trees. "What is it, girl?" he asked, dropping the logs as he followed her gaze. The woods stood silent, their shadows deep and still, but the air felt heavy, watched, and Owen's firefighter's instincts flared, a danger he couldn't see but could feel in his bones. He ushered them inside, locking the door with a thud that echoed in his chest, and grabbed his phone, dialing Dr. Lila Hensley. "Lila, it's Owen," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "Someone's been watching the cabin last night, and I think now too. Ember's on edge. Any word on her past?" Lila's tone was calm, laced with concern. "Nothing yet, Owen. No missing reports match her. But if she's reacting like that, she might know whoever's out there. Be careful. I'll call the shelter in Emberfield, see if they've heard anything." Hanging up, Owen knelt beside Ember, her eyes locked on the window, her body a shield between the pups and the unseen threat. "You're safe here," he promised, his hand resting on her head. "No one's getting through me." She pressed against him, a whine trembling in her throat, and Owen felt a fire ignite within. A protector's resolve, forged in years of saving lives, now burning for this family he'd claimed as his own. Flicker barked, a tiny echo of Ember's courage, and Owen scooped him up, his warmth a lifeline as Spark nuzzled his leg. "You're all mine now," he whispered, tears pricking his eyes. "And I'll fight for you." The day unfolded in quiet vigilance. Owen kept the curtains drawn, the cabin a fortress of light and warmth, and spent hours with Ember and the pups, their presence a balm to his racing thoughts. He told Flicker and Spark to chase a knotted sock, their clumsy bounds filling the room with laughter, and Ember watched, her tail wagging as if their joy eased her burden. "Look at them go," Owen chuckled, his voice soft with wonder. "You've raised some tough little souls." She met his gaze, her amber eyes softening, and for a moment the shadows receded, their bond a glowing ember in the dark. But dusk brought a chill that seeped through the walls. Owen sat by the fire, Ember curled beside him, her pups nestled in her warmth, when a sound pierced the stillness, a faint crunch of snow beyond the porch. Ember's head shot up, her growl rumbling deep as she rose, her body rigid with a fear Owen couldn't soothe. He grabbed his rifle, his heart pounding as he peered through a crack in the curtains. There, closer than before, stood the figure, tall, cloaked in a tattered coat, the moonlight glinting off a rope dangling from their hand. "Damn it!" Owen hissed, his grip tightening as Ember's growl grew feral, her teeth bared in a mother's fierce defiance. "Stay here," he ordered, though Ember followed as he cracked the door, the icy air rushing in. "Who's out there?" he shouted, his voice a steady roar honed from years of command. "This is my land! Show yourself!" The figure stepped forward, revealing a man in his 40s, his face shadowed by a hood, his smirk cold and deliberate. "That's my dog," he said, his voice smooth with menace. "Been looking for her. Time to take her back." Owen's blood ran cold, his rifle rising slightly, the barrel steady. "Your dog!" he spat, incredulous. "She was half dead when she found me, pups and all. If she's yours, why'd she run?" The man shrugged, his smirk faltering as Ember appeared in the doorway, her growl a thunderous warning that shook the night. "She got loose," he said, his tone dismissive. "Happens. But she's mine. Always will be." Owen stepped onto the porch, his boots crunching the frost, his voice still. "She's not yours anymore. She chose me, and I'm not letting you near her or those pups. Get off my land." Ember pressed against his leg, her eyes blazing with recognition and rage, and Owen saw it. This wasn't a stranger. This was her nightmare, the shadow she'd fled. The man's eyes flicked between Owen and Ember, a flicker of unease breaking his calm. "You're making a mistake, old man," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "That dog's trouble. You don't know her like I do." Owen advanced, his rifle unwavering. "I know she's a fighter who deserves better than you. Leave now, or you'll regret it." The man hesitated, the rope slipping from his hand, then turned retreating into the woods as Ember's growl chased him into the dark. Owen watched until he vanished, his breath fogging the air, then bolted the door, his heart racing as he knelt beside her. "He's gone, Ember," he whispered, stroking her trembling fur. "You were so brave. You kept us safe." She nuzzled his hand, her body easing as Flicker and Spark yipped from the quilt, their innocence alight in the storm. Owen scooped them up, holding them close as Ember curled around them, her eyes meeting his with a trust that broke his heart wide open. "No one's taking you," he vowed, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You're my family now, and I'll protect you always." As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Owen sat with Ember and her pups, their warmth a shield against the shadows. The man might return, but Owen was ready. A guardian rekindled, his life ablaze with a love worth fighting for. Together they'd face the past and forge a future, a bond glowing brighter than any flame. The dawn broke over Whispering Pines, hollow with a fragile stillness, the snow outside Owen Marwood's cabin glistening like a promise after the night's confrontation. Inside, the fire burned low, its embers casting a gentle glow across Ember and her pups Flicker and Spark, who slept nestled in the quilt by the hearth. Owen sat in his armchair, his rifle resting within reach, his grey eyes heavy from a sleepless vigil, but alight with a fierce resolve. The man's words, "That's my dog," echoed in his mind, a cold threat that fueled a fire in his chest, a vow to protect the family that had claimed his heart. Ember stirred, her amber eyes blinking open to meet his, a soft whine trembling in her throat as if she sensed the weight of his thoughts. "Morning, brave girl," Owen murmured, his voice a tender lifeline as he slid to the floor beside her. She pressed her head against his knee, her body still tense from the stranger's shadow, and Owen stroked her fur, his rough hands steady with a promise. "He's not taking you, not now, not ever." Flicker yipped, his tiny hazel eyes peeking up, and Spark followed, her blue gaze bright with curiosity, their innocence a balm to the night's fear. Owen rose, brewing coffee as the cabin filled with the scent of warmth and routine, his mind racing with questions. Who was that man? What had Ember endured to flee him with her pups in a blizzard? Her scars, faint but telling, whispered of pain, her growls a memory of survival that broke his heart. He couldn't let it rest. Grabbing his phone, he dialed Deputy Clara Voss, her voice crisp over the line. "Clara, it's Owen. That figure came back last night, closer this time, said Ember's his, tried to take her. I ran him off, but he'll be back." Clara's tone hardened. "Describe him. Anything you saw. I'll dig into it. No one's bothering you or that dog on my watch." Owen recounted the man's tattered coat, his menacing smirk, the rope dangling from his hand, and Clara promised to scour the area and check records. "Keep your doors locked, Owen," she said. "I'll swing by later." Hanging up, he turned to Ember, who watched him with a trust that melted him. "We're not alone in this," he said softly, setting a bowl of kibble beside her. She ate, her tail wagging faintly, and Owen felt a surge of pride. She was healing, growing stronger, and he'd be her shield against whatever lurked in the woods. The morning unfolded in quiet care. Owen sat with Flicker and Spark, their tiny paws batting at his fingers as he dangled a sock, their playful yips filling the cabin with light. Ember joined in, nudging them with her nose, her eyes softening as she watched her pups thrive. "You've raised some brave little souls," Owen chuckled, his voice thick with awe. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, and for a moment the world outside faded. A family forged in the storm's embrace, their bond a glowing ember that warmed his soul. But the threat loomed, a shadow he couldn't ignore. By midday, Owen loaded Ember and the pups into his truck, their blanket a cocoon of safety, and drove to Emberfield's animal shelter, a small haven run by kind hearts who knew the town's strays. Sarah, the receptionist, greeted him with a warm smile, her eyes widening as he carried Ember in, Flicker and Spark peeking from the quilt. "Found her in the blizzard," Owen explained, setting them down. "Someone's after her, says she's his. I need to know if she's got a past here." Sarah studied Ember, her brow furrowing. No collar, no chip when you brought her to Lila, right? She's not familiar, but those scars could be a breeder's cast-off, dumped when she wasn't useful anymore. Owen's fists clenched, anger flaring at the thought of Ember discarded like trash. She's more than useful. She's a miracle, he said, his voice rough. Sarah nodded, her eyes soft. She's lucky she found you. I'll ask around, see if anyone's missing a German shepherd. But Owen, if someone's claiming her, be careful. He thanked her, his resolve hardening as he drove home, Ember's head resting on his arm, her trust a lifeline he'd never betray. Back at the cabin, the community's heart began to stir. Clara arrived that afternoon, her cruiser crunching the snow as she stepped out, her sharp eyes scanning the woods. No sign of him yet, she said, joining Owen on the porch. But those tracks, they loop around your property. He's watching, planning. I've got patrols upped, and I'm checking old reports, breeders, strays, anything that fits. Owen nodded. Ember at his side, her growl a quiet echo of his own defiance. She knows him, he said. She's scared, but she's not running. Neither am I. Clara's gaze softened. You've got a fighter there and a good man watching her back. We'll figure this out. As she left, neighbours trickled in, old friends from Owen's firehouse days, drawn by whispers of his stand against the stranger. Tom, a burly ex-captain, clapped Owen's shoulder. Heard you've got trouble. We're here. Whatever you need. Lila Hensley arrived too, her vet bag in hand, checking Ember and the pups with a gentle touch. They're thriving, she said, smiling. You're their hero, Owen. He blushed, his heart swelling as Ember nudged his hand, Flicker and Spark yipping at his feet. By evening, the cabin glowed with more than firelight, a circle of courage forming around Owen and his family. Tom rigged a spotlight outside, its beam piercing the woods, while Sarah spread word at the shelter, rallying volunteers to keep an eye out. Owen sat by the hearth, Ember curled beside him, her pup sprawled across his lap, their warmth a shield against the night's chill. You've got a whole town behind you now, he murmured, stroking her fur. No one's taking you from us. She sighed, her eyes meeting his with a trust that broke him open, a bond deeper than words, a promise he'd fight to keep. But as the fire crackled, a sound shattered the calm, a faint snap of twigs beyond the spotlight's reach. Ember's ears shot up, her growl rumbling low as she rose, her body a wall between the pups and the dark. Owen grabbed his rifle, his pulse racing as he peered out, the woods alive with shadows. He's back, he whispered, his voice steel as he cracked the door, Ember at his heels. Show yourself, he shouted, the beam sweeping the trees. No figure emerged, but the air thrummed with menace, and Owen's grip tightened. This wasn't over. He bolted the door, kneeling beside Ember as she pressed against him, her eyes blazing with a mother's fierce love. We're ready, girl, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You, me, and this whole hollow will face him together. Flicker and Spark whimpered, curling closer, and Owen held them all, their warmth a fortress against the unknown. The man might return, but Owen's heart burned brighter. A guardian reborn, surrounded by a community's strength, ready to protect the light Ember had brought into his life, no matter the cost. The night clung to whispering pines, hollow like a heavy shroud, the cabin's windows reflecting the fire's glow, as Owen Marwood sat vigilant, his rifle across his lap, his grey eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. Ember lay beside him, her amber gaze locked on the door, her body a taut wire of instinct and courage despite the warmth enveloping them. Flicker and Spark slept in a tangle of limbs on the quilt their tiny snores a fragile thread of peace in a room thick with tension. The snap of twigs from earlier had faded, but the air hummed with an unspoken threat, a shadow that refused to retreat. Owen's hand rested on Ember's head, his fingers tracing the scars beneath her fur, silent stories of a past he'd sworn to shield her from. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, his voice a steady vow as her ears twitched at every creak of the wind. She pressed against him, a soft whine trembling in her throat, and Owen's heart ached. This brave mother, who'd faced a blizzard for her pups, now faced a ghost from her shadows, and he'd be her anchor through it. "We've got this, girl," he murmured, his resolve a flame that burned brighter with every breath she took. Morning dawned grey and restless, the snow outside softening under a timid sun, but the cabin felt like a fortress under siege. Owen brewed coffee, its bitter warmth a lifeline as he watched Ember tend to flicker and spark. The pups, growing bolder, tumbled over each other, their yips a spark of joy that clashed with the unease gnawing at him. Ember ate her kibble, her tail wagging faintly, but her eyes flicked to the window, her growl a quiet echo of the night's fear. "You feel it too, don't you?" Owen said, kneeling beside her. "He's still out there." The day unfolded in a tense dance of care and caution. Owen kept the curtains drawn, the spotlight Tom had rigged casting a stark beam into the woods, its light a warning to the unseen watcher. He played with flicker and spark, their tiny paws batting at his hands, their laughter a balm to his nerves, but Ember stayed close, her body a shield between them and the door. "You're their guardian," Owen murmured, his voice thick with awe as she nudged Spark back to the quilt. "And I'm yours." She met his gaze, her amber eyes softening, and Owen felt a lump rise in his throat. This family, born in a storm, was worth any fight. By noon, Deputy Clara Voss arrived, her cruiser crunching the snow as she stepped out, her sharp eyes scanning the hollow. "Check the tracks again," she said, joining Owen on the porch, Ember at his side. "They circle back. Someone's been here more than once. No ID yet, but I'm digging into old breeder cases. Could be tied to that." Owen's fists clenched, anger flaring. "He came last night, close enough to talk. Said she's his, like she's property." "She knows him, Clara. She's terrified." Clara's gaze hardened. "We'll find him. Patrols are up, and I've got Tom and the crew keeping watch. You're not alone in this." The community's embrace tightened. Tom returned with a radio linking Owen to their network, while Sarah from the shelter spread word in Emberfield, rallying eyes and ears. Lila Hensley stopped by, her vet bag in hand, checking Ember and the pups with a gentle smile. "They're stronger every day," she said, her eyes warm. "You're their rock, Owen." He blushed, stroking Ember's fur as Flicker barked, Spark nuzzling his leg. "They're mine," he said simply, his voice thick, "and I'll keep them safe." Lila nodded, her gaze lingering. "You're not just saving them, you're giving them a life." But dusk brought the storm anew. As the fire crackled, Owen sat with Ember, the pup sprawled across his lap, when a thud echoed from the porch, a deliberate, heavy sound that jolted Ember to her feet, her growl feral and fierce. Owen grabbed his rifle, his pulse racing as he cracked the door, the spotlight sweeping the yard. There, just beyond its reach, stood the man, his tattered coat stark against the snow, his smirk colder than the night, a rope coiled in his hand. "Told you, old man," he called, his voice slicing the air. "She's mine, always will be." Owen stepped out, his boots crunching the frost, his rifle steady as Ember flanked him, her teeth bared in a mother's wrath. "She's not yours," he roared, his voice a thunder honed from years of command. She ran from you half dead with pups you didn't care about. You've got no claim here." The man laughed, a hollow sound that chilled Owen's blood. "She's trouble, always was. You don't know what you're keeping." Ember lunged forward, her growl a primal cry, and Owen grabbed her collar, his heart pounding. "She's a miracle," he spat, "and you're leaving now, or I'll make you." The man's smirk faltered as Ember strained against Owen's hold, her eyes blazing with a fury that mirrored his own. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice trembling as he stepped back, the rope slipping to the snow. "She's not worth the fight." Owen advanced, his rifle unwavering. "She's worth everything. Get off my land. Last warning." The man retreated, his shadow swallowed by the woods, but his threat lingered, a poison in the air, as Owen bolted the door, his breath ragged. "Ember, you're incredible," he whispered, kneeling as she pressed against him, her body trembling with adrenaline and trust. "You stood with me, protected us." She nuzzled his hand, her growl fading to a whine, and Owen scooped up Flicker and Spark, their tiny warmth a lifeline, as he held them close. "He's wrong," he said, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You're worth every fight, every single one." Ember curled around them, her eyes meeting his with a bond that shattered the night's fear. A family united, their love a fortress against the dark. Clara's voice crackled over the radio moments later. "Owen, you okay? Tom saw someone moving, called it in." He gripped the receiver, his voice steady. "He was here. Tried again. We ran him off, but he's not done. Ember knows him, Clara. He's her past." Clara's tone sharpened. "Stay put, we're closing in. Patrols are doubling, and I've got a lead on a breeder shut down last year. Hang tight." Owen set the radio down, his gaze on Ember as she licked her pups, her courage a light that burned through his doubt. The cabin glowed with more than a firelight that night, a circle of strength forged by Owen, Ember, and the Hollow's heart. Tom stationed himself nearby, his truck a sentinel in the drive, while Sarah rallied volunteers to watch the roads. Owen sat by the hearth, Ember at his side, the pups nestled between them, their warmth a shield against the cold. "We've got an army now," he murmured, stroking her fur. "You, me, and all of them. We're unbreakable." She sighed, her head resting on his knee, and Owen felt a fire blaze within, a guardian reborn, ready to face the shadows with a love that wouldn't yield. As the night deepened, the woods stood silent, but Owen knew the fight wasn't over. The man would return, driven by a claim he'd never honor, but Owen was ready, his heart ablaze with a purpose Ember had given him, a stand in the shadows he'd win for the family he'd found. The air in Whispering Pines. Hollow hung thick with anticipation. The cabin's walls a steadfast barrier against the creeping chill of a late winter night. Owen Marwood sat by the hearth, the fire's glow casting a warm embrace over Ember and her pups, Flicker and Spark, who nestled in the quilt, their tiny bodies rising and falling with peaceful breaths. Owen's rifle rested within reach, his grey eyes sharp despite the fatigue etching his face, his heart a steady drumbeat of resolve. Ember lay beside him, her amber gaze flickering between the door and her pups, her body a coiled spring of maternal courage that mirrored his own. The man's latest threat, "You'll regret this," echoed in Owen's mind, a cold whisper that fueled a fire in his soul. He stroked Ember's fur, her warmth grounding him as he murmured, "We're stronger than him, girl. You've got me, and I've got you." She pressed her head against his hand, a soft whine trembling in her throat, and Owen's chest tightened. This brave mother, who defied a blizzard for her pups, now faced a shadow from her past, and he'd stand as her shield, no matter the cost. Flicker yipped in his sleep, Spark curling closer, their innocence a light that steadied his resolve. Dawn broke with a muted glow, the snow outside softening under a tentative sun, but the cabin thrummed with a quiet defiance. Owen brewed coffee, its scent a tether to normalcy, as he watched Ember tend to her pups, their playful tumbles a spark of joy in the tension. "You're growing so fast," he said, his voice thick with pride as Flicker batted at Spark's tail. Ember wagged hers faintly, her eyes softening, but her ears stayed pricked, guardian's vigilance unbroken. Owen knelt beside her, his hand resting on her head. "We've got a fight ahead, but we'll win it, together." The morning unfolded in a fortress of care. Tom's truck rumbled in the drive, his burly frame a sentinel as he checked the spotlight, while Clara's cruiser patrolled the hollow, her sharp eyes scouring the woods. Owen kept the curtains drawn, the cabin a sanctuary of light and warmth, and played with Flicker and Spark, their yips filling the air with hope. Ember joined in, nudging them with her nose, her trust in Owen a glowing ember that warmed his heart. "You're their hero," he murmured, his voice trembling with awe as she leaned into him, her tail sweeping the floor. But noon brought a storm of its own. The radio crackled. Clara's voice, urgent and clipped. "Owen, we've got him, spotted near the Old Mill Road. Matches your description. I'm heading there with backup. Stay put." Owen's pulse raced, his grip tightening on the receiver. "He's close, too close. Be careful, Clara." She grunted. "We've got this. Tom's with you. Keep Ember safe." He set the radio down, his gaze locking with Ember's as she rose, her growl low and fierce, sensing the shift. "He's coming, girl," Owen whispered, grabbing his rifle. "But he's not getting through us." The hollow rallied like a heartbeat. Tom burst in, his face grim. "Clara's right. He's circling. Saw tracks near the creek. We're not letting him near." Sarah arrived, her shelter volunteers in tow, their eyes wide but determined. "We've got the roads watched," she said, her voice firm. "He won't slip through." Lila Hensley followed, her vet bag a quiet promise, as she checked Ember and the pups. "They're fighters," she said, smiling. "Like you, Owen." He nodded, his throat tight, as Ember pressed against his leg, Flicker and Spark yipping at his feet. "They're my family," he said simply, "and I'll protect them." Dusk fell with a heavy silence, the fire crackling as Owen sat with Ember, the pups sprawled across his lap, their warmth a shield against the cold. Then it came, a sharp thud against the door, a deliberate blow that jolted Ember to her feet, her growl a thunderous roar that woke Flicker and Spark. Owen grabbed his rifle, his heart pounding as he flung the door open, the spotlight blinding the figure on the porch, the man, his tattered coat stark, his smirk twisted with menace, a rope clutched in his hand. "Time's up, old man," he sneered, his voice cutting the night. "That dog's mine, Pups too. Hand her over, or I'll take her." Owen stepped forward, his rifle steady, Ember at his side, her teeth bared in a mother's wrath. "She's not yours," he roared, his voice a fire honed from years of defiance. "She ran from you, starved, scared. With babies you left to die, you've got no right here." The man laughed, a hollow sound that chilled Owen's blood. "She's a runner, always will be. You're wasting your time." Ember lunged, her growl a primal cry, and Owen held her back, his heart blazing. "She's a miracle," he spat, "and you're nothing to her now. Leave, or you'll face more than me." Headlights pierced the dark. Clara's cruiser, Tom's truck, a wall of lights as the hollow closed in. The man's smirk faltered, his eyes darting as Clara stepped out, her hand on her holster. "Step back," she barked. "You're done here." Tom flanked her, his fists clenched, while Sarah and the volunteers blocked the drive, their presence a chorus of strength. The man hesitated, the rope slipping from his grasp, as Ember's growl echoed, her courage a flame that lit the night. "You'll regret this," he muttered, his voice shaking as he backed away, swallowed by the woods. Clara advanced, her flashlight cutting the dark. "We've got his trail. He's not getting far." Owen exhaled, his rifle lowering as he knelt beside Ember, her body trembling with adrenaline and trust. "You were incredible," he whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You stood with me." Tom clapped his shoulder, his grin wide. "She's a warrior, and you're her match, Owen." Sarah hugged him, her eyes glistening. "The Hollow's got your back." Lila scooped up Flicker and Spark, their yips a joyful chorus as Ember nuzzled Owen's hand, her eyes meeting his with a bond that shattered the night's fear. "He's gone," Owen murmured, holding them close. "You're safe, forever." The pups wriggled, their warmth a lifeline, and Owen felt a fire forge within, a love worth every stand, a family he'd fight the world for. Clara returned later, her face grim but triumphant. "Caught him a mile out, name's Ray Cutler, ran a breeder mill, shut down last year for cruelty. Ember was his, Owen. She escaped when he tried to dump her and the pups. He's in custody now." Owen's fists clenched, anger mingling with relief. She fought for her life, for them. Clara nodded, her gaze soft. "And found you. She's free now, because of you." He hugged Ember, her tail wagging as Flicker and Spark barked, their joy a melody of victory. The cabin glowed with a warmth deeper than the hearth that night. A fire forged in love, surrounded by a community's courage. Owen sat with Ember and her pups, their presence a light that banished the shadows. "You're my heroes," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm yours." Ember sighed, her head resting on his knee, and Owen knew the fight was won, their bond unbreakable, a future ablaze with hope. The morning sun rose over whispering pines, hollow with a gentle grace, its golden light filtering through the cabin's windows, bathing the room in a tender glow that felt like a new beginning. Owen Marwood sat by the hearth, the fire crackling softly as Ember lay curled beside him, her amber eyes peaceful for the first time since the storm. Flicker and Spark tumbled over each other on the quilt, their yips a joyful chorus that filled the silence left by Ray Cutler's defeat. Owen's rifle rested against the wall, its purpose served, and his grey eyes shimmered with a quiet triumph. A battle won, a family secured. Ember pressed her head against his knee, her tail wagging faintly as she watched her pups play, her body finally free of the tension that had haunted her. "You did it, brave girl," Owen murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he stroked her fur. "You fought for them, and for us." She let out a soft sigh, her eyes meeting his with a trust that broke his heart open, and Owen felt tears prick his eyes. This mother, who'd carried her pups through a blizzard and faced her past with unwavering courage, had given him a purpose he'd thought lost forever. The cabin thrummed with a newfound lightness. Owen brewed coffee, its warmth a ritual of peace as he watched Flicker chase Spark's tail, their tiny paws skittering across the floor. "You're growing into troublemakers," he chuckled, his chest swelling with pride as Ember nudged them back to the quilt, her gentleness a balm to the chaos they'd endured. The Hollow's embrace lingered, Clara's patrols, Tom's vigilance, Sarah's volunteers, a circle of strength that had held them through the dark, now a foundation for their healing. By midday the community gathered, drawn by the victory over Cutler and the love they'd poured into Owen's fight. Clara arrived first, her cruiser crunching the softening snow, her sharp eyes softening as she stepped inside. "He's locked up tight," she said, her voice warm. "Charges for trespassing, animal cruelty, Old records too? He won't bother you again?" Owen exhaled, relief washing over him as he hugged Ember close. "She's free now," he said, his voice trembling. "Thanks to you." Clara smiled, kneeling to scratch Ember's ears. "Thanks to her. And you. She chose a hero." Tom followed, his burly frame filling the doorway, a grin splitting his face. "Hollows buzzing. Everyone's proud of you, Owen. And this little warrior." He tossed a chew toy to Ember, who caught it with a playful wag, her pups barking in delight. Sarah and Lila arrived together, their arms full, blankets from the shelter, treats from the clinic, a bounty of care for the family that had captured their hearts. "They're thriving," Lila said, checking Flicker and Spark with a gentle touch. "You've given them a miracle, Owen." He blushed, his throat tight as Ember leaned into him, her warmth a lifeline. The afternoon unfolded in a celebration of resilience. Neighbours trickled in, their voices a hum of joy as they petted Ember, cooed over the pups and shared stories of the stand on the porch. "Heard you faced him down like a lion," Tom teased, clapping Owen's shoulder. "And her? She's a legend now." Owen grinned, his heart swelling as Ember wagged her tail, Flicker and Spark tumbling at his feet. "She's the real hero," he said, his voice thick. "I just held the line." Sarah hugged him, her eyes glistening. "You both did, and we're all better for it." As dusk fell, the cabin glowed with more than firelight, a haven of healing forged in love and courage. Owen sat with Ember, the pups sprawled across his lap, their tiny warmth a testament to their survival. "You've changed everything," he murmured, stroking her fur as she sighed, her eyes soft with a peace he'd fought to give her. The Hollow's heart pulsed around them. Tom rigged a new lock on the door, Clara left a radio for updates, and Sarah promised a shelter event to honour Ember's story. "You're not just ours," Owen whispered. "You're theirs too." The next day brought a quiet rhythm of recovery. Owen took Ember and the pups outside, the snow melting into patches of earth, the air crisp with promise. Ember sniffed the porch, her tail wagging freely now, her wariness replaced by a mother's joy as Flicker and Spark explored, their tiny legs wobbling with each step. "Look at you go," Owen chuckled, his voice trembling with pride as he sat on the steps, Ember at his side. She nudged his hand, her eyes meeting his with a trust that melted him. And Owen felt a lump rise in his throat. This family, born in a storm, had healed a part of him he hadn't known was broken. Clara's voice crackled over the radio that evening, her tone triumphant. Cutler's talking, confirmed Ember was his, escaped when he tried to ditch her and the pups after the mill shut down. "She's yours now, Owen. No one's contesting it." He set the receiver down, his gaze locking with Ember's as she curled around Flicker and Spark, her warmth a shield of love. "You're home forever," he whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "No more running?" She wagged her tail, a slow, joyful sweep, and Owen held them close, their bond a light that banished the shadows. The shelter event came the following week, a celebration of Ember's journey, the Hollow's yard alive with laughter and light. Sarah unveiled a banner, Ember's haven, a story of courage. And Owen spoke, his voice steady with emotion. "She found me in a blizzard," he said, Ember at his side, Flicker and Spark in his arms, carried her pups to my door, fought for them and for us. This Hollow saved her, and she saved me. She's our heart now. The crowd cheered, kids rushing to pet her, their giggles a melody of hope as Ember wagged her tail, her eyes gleaming with a quiet pride. Tom rigged a playpen for the pups, their antics drawing smiles, while Lila shared Ember's recovery, her coat shining, her strength restored. "She's a miracle," she said, her eyes warm as she hugged Owen. "And you're her match." He blushed, his heart full as neighbours pressed gifts into his hands, toys, treats, a quilt stitched with pawprints, a tapestry of love for the family that had united them. "You're ours," Sarah whispered, her voice thick. "Always will be." That night the cabin glowed with a warmth deeper than the hearth's flames. Owen sat with Ember and her pups, their presence a haven of healing that wrapped him in peace. "You're my light," he murmured, stroking her fur as she rested her head on his knee. Flicker and Spark nestled against her side. "All of you." She sighed, her eyes meeting his with a bond that needed no words. A mother's courage, a man's devotion, a community's heart woven into a future bright with promise. As the stars pierced the sky, Owen framed a photo from the event, him, Ember, and the pups by the fire, a symbol of their triumph. The hollow stood quiet, its shadows banished, and Owen knew their journey had forged something eternal, a love that had faced the dark and emerged stronger, a family that would shine forever in Whispering Pines. Spring whispered through Whispering Pines hollow, the snow giving way to patches of green, the air alive with the promise of renewal as Owen Marwood's cabin stood as a testament to resilience. Inside, the hearth glowed with a gentle flame, its light dancing across Ember and her pups, Flicker and Spark, who bounded across the floor, their once fragile frames now sturdy with life. Owen sat in his armchair, his grey eyes crinkling with a joy that had taken root deep within, his rifle retired to a corner, a relic of a fight won, a peace earned. Ember rested her head on his knee, her amber gaze soft with a trust that had become their cornerstone, a bond forged in a blizzard and tempered by love. The cabin thrummed with a vibrant rhythm, its silence replaced by the patter of paws and Owen's laughter, as Flicker chased Spark around his legs, their yips a symphony of triumph. "You're a pair of rascals," he chuckled, his voice thick with pride as he scooped them up, their tiny tongues brushing his hands. Ember wagged her tail, a slow, joyful sweep, and Owen knelt beside her, stroking her shining coat, once matted with ice, now a testament to her recovery. "You've given me everything," he murmured, tears pricking his eyes. "A family, a purpose." She nuzzled his hand, her sigh a melody of contentment, and Owen's heart swelled. This brave mother had lit his world anew. The hollow had blossomed with their story. The shelter event had sparked a fire of compassion, its echoes rippling through Emberfield and beyond. Sarah's banner, Ember's haven, now hung in the shelter's yard, a beacon for strays and souls in need, while volunteers flocked to help, inspired by a German shepherd's courage and a man's devotion. Owen took Ember and the pups outside each morning, the porch their stage as Flicker and Spark explored, their bounds growing bolder under Ember's watchful eye. "You're free now," Owen said, his voice trembling with awe as she sniffed the air, her wariness replaced by a mother's quiet joy. Clara Voss stopped by often, her cruiser a familiar sight, her sharp eyes softened by pride. "Cutler's gone for good," she said one afternoon, leaning against the porch rail as Ember greeted her with a wag. "Sentenced last week, cruelty, trespassing, the works. Ember's yours, Owen. No one can touch her now." He hugged her, his throat tight as Flicker barked, Spark tumbling over his feet. "She chose me," he said simply. "And I chose her back." Clara smiled, scratching Ember's ears. "You're a team. Hollow's heroes." Owen blushed, his heart full as the pups yipped, their innocence a light that banished the past. Tom and the firehouse crew became regulars, their visits a chorus of laughter and care. "She's a legend," Tom grinned, tossing a ball that Ember chased, her energy a spark that lit the yard. Flicker and Spark joined in, their clumsy bounds drawing cheers, and Owen watched, his chest swelling with a pride he'd once reserved for saving lives. "She's more than that," he said, his voice thick. "She's family." Sarah arrived with treats, her shelter team in tow, their hands full of gifts, collars for the pups, a plaque for Owen. Guardian of Ember's light, a tribute to a fight that had united them all. Lila Hensley's visits were a ritual of healing, her gentle hands checking Ember and the pups with a smile. "They're perfect," she said one evening, her eyes warm as she sat by the fire. "You've given them a miracle, Owen. And they've given you one too." He nodded, holding Flicker close as Spark nuzzled Ember, their warmth a lifeline. "I was lost before them," he admitted, his voice trembling. "They brought me back." Lila hugged him, her gaze soft. "That's what love does. It finds you when you need it most." The Hollow's heart pulsed stronger with each passing day. Sarah launched a program, Ember's Legacy, training volunteers to rescue and foster. Ember's story a spark that spread kindness through the town. Owen spoke at schools, Ember at his side, her tail wagging as kids petted her, their gasps turning to giggles when Flicker and Spark tumbled into their laps. "She carried her babies through a storm," he'd say, his voice steady with emotion, "and found a home with me. She's proof love never gives up." The children cheered, their drawings of Ember lining the cabin's walls, a gallery of hope born from her courage. One afternoon, as Owen chopped wood outside, Ember stood at the window, her nose pressed to the glass, Flicker and Spark playing at her feet. He waved, his grin wide, and she wagged her tail, a joyful dance that made his heart soar. When he stepped inside, she met him at the door, her nudge a greeting that melted him, the pups barking in delight. "You're my light," he murmured, kneeling to hold them close, their warmth a fortress of love. "All of you." Ember leaned into him, her eyes gleaming with a trust that needed no words, and Owen knew. This was there forever. The final celebration came on a crisp spring evening, the Hollow alive with lanterns and laughter as neighbours gathered to honour Ember's journey. Sarah unveiled a sign, Ember's Haven, a sanctuary of second chances. Its words, promise etched in wood. Owen stood before them, Ember at his side, Flicker and Spark in his arms, his voice ringing with pride. "She found me in the dark," he said, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Carried her pups to my door, fought for them and for us. This Hollow saved her, and she saved me. She's our heart, our light, forever." The crowd roared, kids rushing to hug Ember, their joy a melody as she wagged her tail, her pups basking in the love. Tom rigged a play area, Lila shared Ember's tale, and Sarah pressed a quilt into Owen's hands, stitched with pawprints and flames, a tapestry of their triumph. "You're ours," Clara whispered, her eyes glistening. "Always will be." Owen hugged them all, his heart full as Ember rested her head on his knee. Flicker and Spark nestled against her, a family forged in a storm, now a beacon for the Hollow. That night the cabin glowed with a warmth deeper than the hearth's flames. Owen framed the quilt beside a photo, him, Ember, and the pups by the porch, a symbol of their legacy. He sat with them, their presence a haven of light that wrapped him in peace. "You're my heroes," he murmured, stroking Ember's fur as she sighed, her pups curling close. "And I'm yours." She met his gaze, her amber eyes a mirror of love, and Owen felt a fire burn within, a bond unbreakable, a life rekindled by a mother's courage and a Hollow's heart. As stars lit the sky, whispering pines stood quiet, its shadows gone, replaced by a legacy of light. Ember's journey from a frozen doorstep to a warm home had transformed Owen, the hollow, and every soul it touched, proving that love could conquer the darkest storms. Subscribe to our journey, Owen thought, smiling at the thought of sharing their tale. For more stories of courage and second chances, because with Ember, the light never fades.